strategic thinking and planning has not been an option, but a necessity. It's been the skeletal structure upon which they are building their mission and guiding their daily work. Robert Pinheiro is an expert at helping companies from corporations to faith-based organizations find a way to accomplish their nonprofit goals, nurturing business minds that accomplish social good. Robert, welcome.
Thank you, Aaron.
Now, first off, would you please explain strategic thinking?
Okay. Well, my concept of strategic thinking is that it's really a set of ideas and values that provide a framework for an organization to coordinate all of the components of their organization to move from where they are today to where they would like to be at some point in the future.
So strategic ideas are kind of overall master ideas that can be applicable to all the aspects of your organization?
In simplest terms, it's kind of big picture thinking.
And so how does it work? How should a strategy, how do you develop a strategy? How do you think about a strategy?
Well, normally, depending on the life cycle of an organization, whether it's a startup or whether it's been around for a while, as you mentioned, many of these programs have been around for 8 or 10 years, but really haven't moved very much from where they were in the past. And so a good way to start is to bring in not only all the staff, anybody that's impacted by your program, even outside stakeholders sometimes, and to brainstorm and see if your vision and mission are really where you want to go. Many programs need to start at that point.
Well, for example, now the San Benito folks, it seems like what they did was they tried to find out what their community needed.
Right.
And then they took what they had and tried to find ways to plug into it. Now
and that makes sense, yeah, absolutely. Traditionally, nonprofits have come from a perspective of, I need help, I need something from you.
Because we're doing good work.
Exactly, and that doesn't differentiate you from anyone else because everyone feels as if they're doing good work and everyone has needs. But in the case of the San Benito program, they've done a great job of, as you said, going out and really kind of doing some community mapping and finding out how they fit, how they mesh, what can they bring to the various aspects of their community that will add value and make San Benito a better place to live.
And I suppose that particular approach, the idea of trying to make your organization of value to your community, that is applicable to a lot of different organizations in a lot of different communities.
Absolutely, because then you're in a mode where people look to you as a resource rather than someone that they constantly have to be giving something to. So if you can present yourself as a resource, people will be coming to you, and that's really what you want to attempt as a nonprofit organization.
Now, you've probably seen this approach applied in a few different kinds of organizations, is that right?
Yes,
Like, for example, can you give us some examples of where you've seen people try to make themselves useful to the communities in addition to what we saw at San Benito?
Sure. Well, there are, I get around the country a bit, and there are programs like San Benito, some smaller, some larger, that have done a similar job of making themselves an invaluable part of their community. They're always at the table. There are some other social service programs that have done the same thing in the area of the areas of health and human services, to where their communities see them as a contributor and not something that they're just pouring money into.
So now, one of the other things you talk I know a lot about is sustainability of organizations. And then the strategic approach to sustainability. Right. What does that mean?
Well, again, this mindset, if you've portrayed your organization as a contributor, you're much more likely to have people coming to you when there are projects that they want your cooperation with. Most often when budgets get tight, like in the economic times we've had recently where funders aren't, there's not as much money to give, there's more competitiveness for the money, the first inclination is to eliminate people that are kind of in a dependent mode, really, and you want to bring on the people that are going to contribute to your end goals. So I think by having that mentality of being a contributor, you're more likely to be a sustainer as well.
Now, so the idea is to sustain your organization. Is the idea to sustain the organization itself over time, right, or to sustain the work that you want to do, whether or not?
Well, both really. You're not going to be able to do your work if your organization goes away, and so in essence, by sustaining the organization itself, and this is something that a lot of folks miss because they really focus on the work and the good things that they're doing, which certainly has a place. But they sometimes do that at the expense of building an infrastructure and having a really solid plan as to how they're going to move that forward in the future. And sometimes that creates a disconnect between values. Some people see that as a conflict, but it doesn't have to be.
All right, let me try to understand. So now I've got an organization, and now I've brought together, I've got to say, a literacy program.
Okay.
So I brought together in a big room, I got my, I got the local housing people, and I got the local health club owners, and various people sitting around the table. Now, how do I focus that conversation so that I can discover what I can contribute to them? How do we do that?
Sure. Well, the first thing you really need to do as an organization is to do some homework and learn about the needs of other organizations in your community, and that doesn't happen automatically. Every agency has their own priorities. I can give you a quick example here. A couple of years ago, with all these litigation about the smoking and the money that came from the cigarette companies, many of the health departments in the state of Texas got substantial amounts of money to essentially do whatever they pleased with towards the goal of providing better health and reducing, cigarette smoking. Well, that's a natural tie-in for a lot of organizations, not only literacy organizations, but any organization in the field of health and human services. But very few people tapped into that because they were just thinking about their traditional sources.
Now, wait a minute. Are you saying that a literacy organization could somehow have helped and contributed to reduction in smoking?
Absolutely. Most behavioral changes are based on people having more information. And and it's very, very difficult if you're limited in the way you can access information. If the only way you can get information is through listening, and that's one of the weakest ways that we learn. If we don't see it and we're not able to read about it, most people don't retain it. So a literacy organization would have a definite role in helping provide educational services in that kind of an environment, and also helping them tailor their materials so that a larger audience can read them.
So what you're saying is that any of the players in your community any organization could plug in some way to virtually any of the players in the community?
In most cases, yes. I mean, there are some organizations that have such targeted objectives and missions that it's not a natural fit outside of their arena, but there are an awful lot of social service organizations that could really mesh with many, many agencies and objectives in any community.
Okay, so now the idea is to bring together the stakeholders. You can't bring together everybody in the community.
Absolutely not.
So how do you think about which stakeholders you should bring that will, you can interface best with your organization?
Well, it's important to, again, coming back to knowing your community, to know which people actually have influence and power in your community. There are a lot of people that are very nice and would probably contribute some good ideas, but they really don't have the ability to turn those ideas into action. And so you need to be careful in your selection of people, that they are people that can actually convert your ideas and your goals into action in the community.
So do you have to look for the ones with money?
Not necessarily money. A lot of people have influence for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it is money, sometimes it's political, it can be religious, it can be just leadership in the community, people that have a lot of credibility and respectability, and if you're associated with them in your organization, that you're going to kind of, in a sense, get some of that runoff of what they have.
So is the idea to look for the biggest movers and shakers you can find?
Right, and not always the biggest. I don't want to give the impression it has to be the biggest, but in some communities, every community has a different profile, and you need to find out in your community who that person is. It could be a minister, it could be someone on the mayor's staff, it could be a number of people, and the key for the organization that's doing the planning is to find out who that person is or who those people are.
And how do you do that?
You do it by getting involved outside of your own organization. I'll share a quick story with you. Years ago, when I was a young CPA out of college, and I used to go to our monthly meetings every month. And then it dawned on me one day that I'm not going to get clients being at a meeting of other accountants, that I need to go outside the scope of my world. So I started going to the Architects Association and the contractors and the insurance, and all of a sudden my business grew. And I think nonprofits can do something kind of analogous to that. Don't just go to your own conferences, your own meetings, and stay within the world of your colleagues, but get out there and find out what's going on in other agencies. And that's how you get that information.
But it is tricky, isn't it, if you have, again, a literacy organization, to look at it's easy to look at a bookstore and say, okay, I can help with those guys.
Sure.
But it's trickier to look at a health club and think, oh, these guys need to tie into my literacy group.
Sure.
So it requires a kind of a different or more expansive thinking on the part.
Yes, really, like I said, a big picture thinking, you know. And the health club, that's a kind of a tough example, but for one of the ways a health club recruits members is to emphasize the benefits of getting in shape and staying in shape. And, and they do that through a lot of print media. So if I can't read, that I'm excluded from their audience.
Right.
So there's a definite benefit for them to be able to reach more people than they reach now. And if you look at the statistics, there's quite a large portion of the population that is excluded from their marketing.
And people who could pay their money, pay their membership
Right.
dues.
Exactly.
So you
Exactly.
also talk a lot about in your work about focusing on ideas rather than crises.
Yeah, or rather than chasing money.
Chasing money,
and it's,
that's a
it's-
big crisis.
And it's awfully tempting to chase money because that's what some people perceive as the driver of their organization.
well,
But-
and in fact,
and
you
it does,
do gotta-
and it does. You've got to pay the rent. You've got to pay the staff. But I think when you shift your focus to that, you have opportunities to drift away from your core values and where you really want to go. And so you end up someplace that you didn't plan on going because you're following other people's priorities and not your own. And so I think it's a dangerous road to go down over the long term. It may solve a short-term problem, but it's not. I don't think it's going to contribute to long-term sustainability.
But you got to give us some help on this, because I mean,
Okay.
you and I both know that money is really, really serious and true and real and inescapable. So now you're telling people who are running organizations, well, give us some advice about how to divide the time, because there got to be some time you
Right.
spend just trying to pay the bills.
Right.
Are you saying spend half your time paying the bills and half the time on the ideas, or 70-30?
Well, I
or-
don't know that I have a magic bullet for it, but I think you, and things like paying bills, those are operational things. I guess what I'm saying is going after money that may not have a lot to do with your core mission. A new grant rolls out and you say, oh, I'd like that money. So you change your organization to try and match up with that money. And if you're doing that, you're constantly in that mode and your organization loses its identity. People don't know who you are and what you're about, and that's the danger. So you don't really brand your organization. I think it's real important to do that.
So are you saying that if you have I have a mission. My mission is to help children to be more active. If that's my
Okay.
mission. If I see there's a pile of money over here, if I kind of decide, if I help the children to identify better toys,
Right.
I ignore that pile of money and just stay. I just really should ignore that pile of money?
Well, I honestly would. I would look, unless I could see how my activity could become a piece of that larger. Now that's a possibility very
That's-
often. You can fit in, you don't have to completely sell out. You can bring part of what your organization does and fit into a larger picture.
But you're saying keep that diamond-like
but
focus
keep that
on,
focus,
on
you know.
precisely
Right,
what it is.
Right. People need to know who you are, you know, and they need to get that message over and over. And if you keep changing who you are, the message is lost. You know, McDonald's is not trying to become an upscale steakhouse. You know, people know who they are. They know what the expectations are when they go there. And I think that continuity is important for an organization.
And so maintaining that focus is a part of that strategic thinking, right?
I
It's
think
that
so.
you have that strategy, this is who you are, and you
Right.
try to keep that going and keep and infect all that you do with that
Right.
particular single clear kind of idea.
Exactly, and not to try and be all things to all people. So, and if you do that over a period of time, it takes courage to do that, because there are times when you do have to turn an eye away from what might appear to be some easy money. But the benefit of it over the long haul is that if you do a good job of this over time, everyone in your community, when they have a need that they know you can, provide resources for, you're going to be the first agency that they think of. And I think over the long haul, you're going to see that you'll benefit from that
So
approach.
I mean, it sounds like you're saying not only does the organization have to have a clean and clear strategy for what it wants to do and an idea of what it is, but it has to find a way to communicate that it has that idea to the
Absolutely.
other people. Now,
Absolutely. And that has to be something that permeates your entire organization. Your volunteers need to get that message. Your board needs to have that message. All of your materials that you put out into the marketplace need to have that message, so that there's a consistency of message throughout your organization. So you don't have volunteers getting one message and funders getting maybe a different message.
So how do you get everyone to buy in Just, because people have their own, they have their own fiefdoms, they have their own concerns.
Sure.
So the trick is, one of the tricks is to get everybody buying into it, everybody engaged in the process. Well, how do you do that?
Well,
first of all?
part of that, it's the same issue involved in any kind of a teamwork activity. People need to see that they are a contributor. So someone may be in one component of your organization, they need to see some tangible evidence that what they do not only benefits externally, but benefits the other people in the organization, so that they don't feel like they're operating kind of discreetly,
But you want to get them to feel like they're contributing to this plan,
Right,
to this
exactly,
strategy.
exactly.
So how do you do that? How do you make
Well,
sure?
communication, internal communication. They need to be involved in the process. One of the things I see that happens from time to time is a strategic plan is kind of inflicted upon people. So 2 or 3 key people go away to a retreat or whatever, and they come back and say, "We've got a plan." And it's hard to get ownership in that when it was just thrust upon you. No one asked you what you thought. No one involved you in the process. So it's real important to have that involvement from day one, and to give people an equal plane, so that I don't feel like if you're the director and I'm a staff person, that I have to watch what I say or guard my thinking because of how it might affect you. You need to be open and honest in that.
But all right, so let's see.
Yeah.
I just saw this great guy, Robert Pinero, and he's got these great ideas. So now I want to get 3 or 4 of my key staff people to buy into Robert Pinero's ideas. What do I do? Do I show them this DV? Say, go home, take this DV home, and you'll be tested in a week?
Well, I think that this DVD hopefully will have a value where it can kind of create a starting point for people. It's unrealistic to think that someone's going to just run off and be able to completely turn their organization around just based on that. But it can create a mindset so that people start thinking that, I'm the volunteer coordinator, let's say, but they can't do good PR unless I do my job. They can't really convince funders maybe to support our organization unless I do my job. And you have that same feeling on the flip side, so that people really do get a sense that they're a critical part of this organization. And it's the old weakest link of the chain. No matter how good the other things are, if all the supporting activities don't hold together, you're really going to fall on your face. So,
it's almost sounds as if the act of putting together a plan is almost as important as the plan itself.
It really is. It's an energizing experience. Often people have not had the luxury, especially in modestly sized nonprofits. You don't have a lot of
$50,000 budgets and under. Right?
Yeah, well, that's below modest, but you don't really have a lot of time to daydream. You really don't. You're so busy carrying out tasks that you don't have that luxury of sitting back and dreaming. And sometimes the strategic planning process can kind of create that, at least for a limited amount of time, where you can just dream. I had someone in Washington, D.C. last week ask me, I wasn't ready for this question, what would you do if I gave you $3 million today? And that's the kind of thing you need to sit down and dream about. What would you do, if you had the ability to get those kinds of resources?
Does every nonprofit need a strategic plan?
I think so. Even the small ones, you need to scale things obviously according to your current abilities. It's probably not a sound plan if you're running along at $50,000 a year to say that in 5 years we're going to have a $6 million budget. That wouldn't be realistic. But you can take the same principles, those principles of everybody buying in, of having your board, your volunteers, whoever's helping you with your marketing, to get them all on the same page, to plan together. You can still do that on a scale of, the planning itself doesn't take money. The planning is about ideas.
All right, I want to try to do a little bullet point here.
Sure.
I want to take through the steps that you recommend for developing a strategic plan. Now, I want to make a strategic plan. Okay. What's the first thing I need to do?
Okay, well, there are some traditional things. Strategic planning is not a new concept that's been around for a long time. And there are a lot of traditional approaches that are very accessible to people. They can buy workbooks and worksheets and everything to find out.
So would you recommend
the mechanics. I would recommend that if they haven't done anything in the past. That's a good starting point. And it takes you through a process of identifying your strengths, internally, your strengths and weaknesses, brainstorming about, your vision and your mission.
So I just want to make sure I got this. So number one, get some literature, do some reading.
I would say get some resources, right?
Educate yourself.
Educate the process.
Okay. And then,
educate
okay,
yourself
now
on the process.
I've read several
Right.
books. I'm ready to rock and roll. I
Right.
got some ideas. I got some models.
Right.
Now what?
Right. I think the next thing I would do would be to communicate to all the stakeholders in this process, whether they be staff, whether they be board members, perhaps even someone externally that's going to help participate in this process. I would communicate the plan or the structure that we're going to try and follow, and give people assignments so that when they come to this planning process, they don't just come as a blank slate. They come prepared. They know the kinds of things we're going to be thinking and exploring, and also to come with information about the activity that they oversee in the organization.
All right, so now I've gathered my resources,
Okay.
and now I've disseminated that. I've kind of helped to educate some of the other folks that I need to work with me. So now
Okay.
we're basically
Right.
all on a
We're all-
similar page.
right, right.
Now what?
Right. Well, what I like to do, and this may not follow precisely what what some of the literature has, I like to start with brainstorming. And often it's the first time that this group has brainstormed together. Many times, people in one area of the organization, like the folks that work with the volunteers or the folks that work with the funders, they probably have opportunities to sit around and bounce ideas off one another. But it's not very often that they may have had a chance to come together as a group and really brainstorm and see how they mesh with one another. So I would start with that.
Now, and this is this brainstorming is as to developing the plan.
Right. Right.
Now, ultimately, who will create the plan? Is the plan going to be something that will arise
I think
out of this?
it does, yeah. It actually evolves out of this group activity. I don't think it's good to have a facilitator, if you can, an outside facilitator, because it takes away some of the biases that we all bring to the table. So an outside facilitator can kind of mitigate that. But you want to make sure that whoever is doing that doesn't take control, that they truly facilitate and not control. And in many small organizations, I've seen someone in a leadership position who is well-intentioned, but actually controls the process, doesn't let the process evolve.
And I assume that once I have assembled my material and I have disseminated information to some of the key folks in the organization, and then on the third step we've brainstormed and kind of developed a plan, is it time for marching orders?
Not yet, because really many times when you go through this process, especially if you haven't done it before, it's not uncommon to revisit your mission and vision. Many programs don't have they have a mission that they inherited from the founder many years ago, and they may not even be operating really under that mission, but it has a tendency to get a life of its own and be embedded in their documentation. So I found that in many cases that mission statement is revisited, retooled. You talked about rebuilding your ship. They rebuild the mission statement.
So you're saying after you've had a brainstorming session and you've kind of gotten a good chunk of ideas, then you need to go back to your mission to make sure that those ideas are in keeping with that which you fundamentally intend to be doing?
Or in many cases, the mission may not be valid any longer. It's not heresy to change your mission. And I think you need to be open to that if the reality of your world has changed, that perhaps your mission needs to change. And as long as it doesn't divert from your core values, that's not a problem.
Okay. So now that we've assembled our plan with the group, and I assume as broad a group, you want to get as broad a group involved
As
diverse a
practical,
group
sure.
as practical. So now we've checked to see that it is now consistent with that mission which we've now chosen.
Right.
Now marching orders?
Now we're getting close. Yeah,
Okay,
now
tell me.
Now we're getting close. There's a lot of mechanics and logistics, I think, after that point where you really start bulleting, what are we good at? What is it that we already do very well that we don't need to tinker with? What are some of our weaknesses internally? What are areas where we really need improvement? And to start getting a profile of where you are now, that snapshot of where are we beginning, and then to look outside your organization and identify external threats and opportunities is usually what they're called in the literature. So you need to look in your community and say, is there anything going on in my community that is a threat to my organization? Is there some large group coming in that's going to try and snap up the work that I'm doing or usurp my organization? Are there opportunities? Are there faith-based organizations I can link up with? Is the local government looking for a service that I can provide? So you really start accumulating a lot of data at this point about your world, internal and external, and that's kind of what gets you for the marching orders. Now you can move towards establishing some goals and objectives and strategies as to how you're going to get there.
And this approach has worked well for a lot of organizations.
Sure it has.
And so, once we've established our goals, then we assign them and we get everyone gets their marching orders.
Right. And we figure out the actual strategies, how we're going to do that. So if we say that we want to, we can come up with a strategy that says we want to serve 20% more people in our organization next year. Well, that sounds nice, but now what are we going to do? The nitty gritty. What are we going to do to make that happen?
And that's the plan.
And that's the plan.
And that is that's the thing that you will arrive at after you have assembled your resources, disseminated your information, brainstormed with the organization, checked to make sure it's a part of your mission, and then you've identified what it is specifically what you do is, and then you got to figure out a plan to get there.
Right, and that's going to be a very important step, because once you determine what those steps are, they're going to control allocation of resources. If you determine that part of what you do now is not going to be a large part of your effort in the future, you're not going to spend money and allocate resources towards that activity. You're going to direct it towards the activities that are moving you towards your goal.
And having done all those things, and your organization begins to flower, and your ship sails brilliantly into the sunset, we all say, thanks to Robert Pinero, things have worked out wonderfully.
Well, at that point too, though, you need to have a way to measure it. You need to have a common ground for how are we going to know when we got there?
Oh, there is that question. Yeah, how do you know that you won?
How are we going to know? Now, some things lend themselves towards measurement quite obviously. You know, when you start talking about percentage increases or numbers of, dollars, people served, those are easy to quantify, but a lot of the values of your organization, sometimes those are a little more difficult to quantify. I know I always talk about, instead of just demographics, you need to know a lot about the psychographics. Are you really, the demographics are easy. They can always be put into numbers, but some of the psychographics is the kind of the heart of your organization the same. Are you moving? Do people have the same sense? A good example of what a psychographic is would be Southern Charm. Okay, Southern Charm. Everybody kind of has a sense of what that is. Right. The genteelness. That's a psychographic. So if you're working in a community, say in the South, it's important to know that you can't come flying out of Manhattan and have your very aggressive, boom, 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 boom kind of a style in Charleston.
All right.
It's not going to fly. So you need to know the psychographics of where you are too, and that can be very important.
Well, it sort of brings us back to where we started, just understanding the world that you live in, not only in its kind of mechanics, but its kind of psychic and its spiritual parts.
Sure, and those, you can measure those things by by finding out what their perceptions of your program are in the community. Aside from the numbers, I've run across programs that on paper don't look like they do very much, but their perception in the community is wonderful. And so there's a balance there. You want some of each.
Well, and that's the trick. You got to be a part of that community and work strategically and smartly to make it that way. Well, thank you so much, Robert Pinero.